All right, I was not expecting applause. This is definitely the biggest stage I've been on at JNUC, as I was telling Josh, so it's exciting. I think we got some fun things to talk about today. So as Adam said, Mike Vandelender, product at Jamf, Matt Capel, Josh Yegveld, and we are here to talk about employee badges in Apple Wallet. Jeering from the crowd. So we had some good announcements in the keynote this morning. I think there's a lot of excitement around it. I definitely saw a lot of people down in the vendor booths talking to Swift Connect. So it's exciting, but we're not really here right now on this stage to talk about pricing and availability and all those things about like what we're actually going to bring to market as a product. This is just kind of more of let's plant the seed and talk about these things because this is probably new workflows that you want to embed into your environment. So we'll dig into the details, and again, we'll have time for questions at the very end. And then one other thing I wanted to say was, this is certainly like Jamf's and Swift Connect's perspective on the implementation of employee IDs in Apple Wallet. There's some nuance in all of this, so try to have that caveat in there. All right, so where does this all begin? With these little white plastic badges. I saw Dean had one of these on stage this morning. And we are probably very well familiar with these badges. We used to use them every day. I haven't used mine in a couple of years, and if you're like me, you probably lost it for a little while and maybe found it again for the purposes of really bringing with you today on stage. And some of us have multiple of these badges. Personally, like we've got a badge to get into the front door of the building. We've got another badge to actually get into the office. They're different systems. And the problem, one of the problems mostly, is just that they're easy to lose. They are hard to manage. And sometimes, you know, the problem really lies in provisioning these badges to our employees. And so a question I just wanted to ask is, you know, for the people that you work with and the people you support and enable, what does it look like on their first day joining your company? What is the process, not only to get them set up with their Mac and iPhone and all those good things, but how do they actually be productive? What does it take for them to come into the office? Who do they have to meet? What do they have to bring with them? What are the ceremonies that are involved in just getting one of these little badges that you can tap in and get through the door? I think most recently we've been talking about like actually having to physically mail these badges out to new employees ahead of time so that they could use them, you know, in the office. On the flip side, this is Jamf's office in Minneapolis. What if you've been working at the same company for 5+ years? You've come to that same office every day. And that badge really only works for that specific building, that specific room. What does it take to get updated credentials, an updated badge? Like, what is that process? And it's complexity, it's messy, and it's just different from the systems that we're used to working with regularly. And finally, say, for example, you're traveling across the country to come to some sort of a conference for a few days, and you're at a new office, and you don't have a badge to get into the office in that city. You want to meet up with some coworkers. What do you have to do to get a badge to go through that office door? Maybe there's not even anybody that works at the front desk to help you out. So wouldn't it be nice if there was some sort of a self-service option to get yourself access to one of these access badges? It makes sense, right? Because we're so used to using our phones to get access to so many digital resources. We would want our physical resources to kind of be managed in the same way. It's convenient to be able to use your iPhone to launch an app, sign in using your organization's credentials, and get access to Slack, your email, Zoom, whatever it is. But when it comes to a physical space, it's a completely different process and system. So we think that it should be as easy as really provisioning any other application or service on your devices. We think we've got an option here to allow the user to give them a self-service option. And one of the great benefits of relying on your phone is you probably know where it is all the time. If you don't know where it is, we have iCloud, we have Find My, we have Jamf. Like, we've got all these different services in our pocket that we can use to find those devices. You can lock it, you can erase it, you could do whatever you need to do. And even beyond that, you've got a little bit of a backup built in too, right? If you've got an iPhone, maybe you've got an Apple Watch, it's a backup to your phone. You don't know where your phone is, the watch is literally strapped to your wrist. So it's a lot more convenient because we use it for everything else. Why have this secondary physical badge? But using your phone as a badge isn't a new idea, right? We've been able to do this for a number of years now. But at the same time, the user experience, like, just, it was lacking, right? It relied heavily on like an app-based experience. It was an app that had to integrate with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, rarely NFC was an option, if at all. And you had to have like background location services running all the time. And so the app would be able to tell, are you approaching the building or approaching the door? It was a lot to ask of a user to trust that application just for the benefit of being able to gain access to a building. So the big, like, monumental shift that's happening right now, or has happened in the last couple of years, is that Apple is building these systems directly into their devices and their operating systems. And these are probably workflows that we're already used to, right? If you use Apple Pay, if you use transit cards on your Apple devices, then employee badges and Apple Wallet are the same thing. You're able to present your device to some sort of a badge reader. It selects automatically the right card out of your wallet to present to that reader. Depending on policies, you likely don't even have to use Face ID or Touch ID to enable the use of that card. And then on top of it all, with, what is it called, Power Reserve, the device doesn't even really have to have a good charge. Your device could be, battery depleted, and you're still able to present that device to the reader and use it as a credential. So it's a huge shift from, again, like that app-based model to just relying on what's already built into the device. So a brief history of kind of what has led us to this stage with employee badges and Apple Wallet. A few years back, Apple started talking about student IDs in Apple Wallet. And they came out of the gate with support for, I think, 6 different US-based universities. And the concept was, instead of printing off a bunch of plastic badges, students should be able to just get an app. They can sign into the app using their student credentials, and now they have a badge in Wallet that acts for access to the dormitory. You can pay for your food in the cafeteria, you can go to different student events. Like, you can just completely rid yourself of that student badge. And they kind of kept moving that forward, every year or so, adding in support for new universities, different locations geographically around the world. But then a small pandemic happened. And then 2021, at WWDC, Apple kind of made like yet another big announcement. And I think a lot of the bullet points were really consumer-friendly focused announcements, right? You're able to use your phone as your car key. You're able to use your phone to pair with like HomeKit, and you've got your key to your house, again, on your device. There are hotel keys built into Wallet. And the last one was being able to use your phone as an employee badge. We've evolved all the way from student IDs to the home and now into the office. So that was last June. And so for the past year, I guess, a little over, Jamf's been working to kind of align with Apple's goal there of replacing the physical wallet and embedding these badges inside of Apple Wallet. What slide is it on? This one, yeah. Let's see. So yeah, made the announcement at WWDC 2021. It was made as a part of iOS 15 last fall, but you needed to do a lot of work to kind of get this implemented inside of your environment. Jamf started working towards making that possible for our own employees, right? Eating our own dog food, seeing what this is like, and letting people kind of use this on their devices. So if you want to read more about that, I think the QR code still works. But we've made a blog post just in July to talk about what we're trying to enable with the modern workplace by giving this kind of self-service option to our employees. So the big shift, I guess, pandemic, working remote, going back into the office for some, maybe not all. Personally, I don't work in the office all that often, even though it's just a few miles down the street. But it is nice to be back in person at JNUC, that's for sure. So moving forward, there's this concept of hybrid work, right? You want to be able to support your employees and your people by giving them the option to kind of work remotely if they need to, come into the office if they want to, and providing access with the right services and the tools to make that possible. You want to reduce all the friction, you want to keep them productive, keep them efficient. And we have been doing that with the move to cloud-based services, and the gap, the remaining bit here, was how you actually enable somebody to come into the office without having to meet someone ahead of time. And when you do that, when you extend the ability for somebody to just simply use their personal device to get into what is otherwise, a secured perimeter, you have to, this is where our perspective comes in, you have to be aware of the you have to be aware of the device. You want it to be a trusted device. You likely want it to be a managed device. And you want to have kind of that basic information and knowledge to make the decisions required to allow, disallow access to your workspace. When you do that, you have a lot more assurances, right, that the person using the device is who they say they are. With these plastic badges, if I drop it, it has my name on it. You can basically pretend to be me, which is not that great. With my iPhone, you've got to have my passcode, my face, my fingerprint, whatever. And for me, that's a nice assurance. But for our IT teams, the app is deployed through Jamf Pro. It's installed through MDM. It's configured through MDM. My device, because it's managed and because we have Jamf Trust on it, we know if it's a jailbroken device. We know if I'm not running the latest version of iOS. All those different things that you want to know, like somebody standing on a stage in San Diego signing into Okta while somebody else is trying to badge tap in the Minneapolis office. I can't be in both places at the same time. You want that logic in the middle to be able to inform the decision, should this actually be happening? So having gone through kind of that whole process of setting it up and using this inside of Jamf, here's kind of the main takeaways, the learnings for you when you kind of begin your journey and explore whether you want to have this for your environment as well. So requirements. We're talking right now really about iOS and watchOS. We can also talk about Android too, because there's options for supporting that, but for the purposes of this talk and Apple Wallet, let's talk about Apple platforms. So you see that you support Apple Wallet, or employee badges in Apple Wallet all the way back to the iPhone 6S. That's pretty good. That's not the most recent hardware, but that's okay. If that's the device that you have, you're going to be able to still support your employees with those devices. Those iPhones run iOS 15 at the very least, so you can still support that. Same with Apple Watch. These are probably 6, 7-plus-year-old devices at this point that are still being supported. So as long as you can run what was the most recent OS last year, iOS 15, you're going to be able to take advantage of this functionality. You're going to need an Apple ID signed in on these devices. And when we usually talk about Apple IDs, you have to compartmentalize, right? Personal Apple IDs and managed Apple IDs, federated managed Apple IDs, what you typically use inside of businesses and the enterprise or education. And I think the important call out here is it needs to be a personal Apple ID. This is not anything that really plays with managed Apple IDs well. Managed Apple IDs definitely have their part, because if you're going to go through account-based user enrollment, you want to have managed Apple IDs for that. And that's fine. You want to have managed device, there's a way to enable that. But at least for the purposes of Apple Wallet, it's personal Apple IDs. This is where you come in, a participating employer. So this is obviously very much an opt-in process. It's not like because of Apple's announcements or anything that we've talked about today, people are just magically going to be able to download an app and have access to your office spaces today. Like, this is something you have to participate in. You're not really opening up any doors there. Yeah, I mean, everything else is going to be about how you participate in that process. So if this is something you want to opt into, again, this is all driven by apps. It's apps to make sure you've got the right configuration. You want to authenticate the user, and they do so by using their cloud-based, identity provider credentials. So, imagine new employee getting their device set up, either a personal device, it could be a new device provided by the company. They launch an application by Jamf, and they're presented with the option to sign in using their credentials, right? So if you're already using cloud-based identity providers like Okta, Google, Microsoft, then you're in a good space to be able to support this. Only after the user signs in using their credentials, when they go through multi-factor authentication, once we can validate who that user is, then we can begin that process to generate the right credentials for them. And again, this goes all the way back to trying to make this process a lot like any other app or service that individual expects to be able to use during their workday. This is where the magic comes in, I think. So if you go back and watch Apple's announcement about employee badges in Apple Wallet, there will be a nice big white screen with a bunch of logos. And those logos are going to call out the partners that Apple has listed for being able to behave as what we'll call a credential issuer or credential manager. And this is the integration between Apple Pay services and the world that we live in, which is the badge issuing provider. Right. So there's a limited list of credential issuers that Apple has partnered with. And so that's just one of those requirements you have to work through and just make sure that you have the right participants to make this possible. And fortunately, we've got people on stage who can talk about that. But it's probably with my background in IT and doing Mac management, it was the part that I knew the least about talking to those types of credential providers. It was a black box. And so that's something definitely to dig into to learn more. But once you start hearing the names and the brands, it becomes very obvious who you're talking about. So once you've got that integration layer with Apple, then it's about integrating with the actual infrastructure that lives within your environments. And this can be insanely complex because you may have one office, you may have 100 offices in various locations, you could have all kinds of different legacy infrastructure involved in getting the actual door reader and back-end process of your employee directory and all that information is synced up. That is where a lot of the complexity starts to seep into this. We understand devices, management, deployments, but trying to get it integrated then with this infrastructure is an exercise. So there are a vast number of access control systems that I'm sure we're all customers of. You just have to kind of figure out which one or multiple ones you are a customer of. But that is definitely going to inform basically what happens next. To reduce the complexity, you need kind of a layer of abstraction. And you need somebody to act as an integration platform to bring together all those different providers into not only just one interface, but to simplify it for the end user. Again, if you have multiple offices, If you don't have your own buildings, you're working, you're one of many tenants within a larger building. Again, you may have multiple cards for different buildings or different floors even within the same building. And you need a way to kind of consolidate that and abstract the complexity away, right, from your users, because that's not really what they want to be concerned with. They just want to be able to get into the office. So to talk about integrations, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Capel here from Swift Connect. And I'll give you the clicker.
Thank you, Mike. Here. Well, this is my first JNUC. It's great to be here. We are so excited, as announced this morning, to be able to help Jamf customers and organizations move to Employee Badge and Apple Wallet. Our whole mission is to move credentials from the physical card onto the phone. It's great to move atoms to bits and deploy this, but the big game changer here, as we'll go through, is the ability to deploy these credentials in real time, remotely, do the same for permissions, and allow organizations to manage their physical security in the same way that they manage their logical security today across a variety of different environments. And so Swift Connect was built to do this, to connect with the various systems that you have in your organizations, and then allow this to be seamless, automated, programmatic, and as I mentioned, on demand. And so show of hands, how many people here have more than one access card in their wallet, whether it's for their own office space or for their base building? A few. And so this diagram here sort of explains why. And the reason for that is that every entity that controls access, whether it's, as we're showing here, Global Inc., an enterprise across different locations, or the various landlords that Global Inc. is a tenant of, they all have their own environment of access control systems and of credentials and credential providers and readers and different formats. And usually that isn't compatible with each other or seamless across them. And so the easiest way to fix this is to give you multiple credentials and put you on multiple access control systems. And so if you're an employee in Global Inc. and you're being put into 2 or 3 of these buildings, this is done manually today by somebody in your security department who is emailing individual property managers, going to your own access control system, so 4 or 5 different access control systems, and then putting you in, if you leave the company or if you're exited, those things have to be updated manually as well. And so what we do with our product, which is called Access Cloud, is we connect all of this. So of these different access control systems, we're able to add somebody to them in real time in an automated way without manual intervention. Getting a credential from HID is automated as well. So if you are added to a new space for a day at the office, or if you're a new employee starting a 5-day a week scenario, we would go to HID, get that credential and put it in the access control system, and then facilitate that getting put into the Apple Wallet for you as well when you click Add to Wallet. If you have multiple credentials, as we're showing here, because of these different credential formats and different scenarios, we can handle that as well. And that's what's needed for the user to have one experience. So one credential, or one pass as it's called, in Wallet, and having to just put the phone near the reader and not select the right pass or the right credential. No more do you have to sort of search in your wallet and find the right one. Additionally, what's not shown on here is the integrations to other systems like Jamf, Okta, Active Directory, to allow these users to come in from your source of truth, your IDP, in a completely automated way. Someone gets added to work at a certain location or part of a certain team, can cause permissions and credentials to flow down automatically so that your staff doesn't have to manually do this anymore. Same thing goes for the mobile device. By working with Jamf, putting the credential, the Add to Apple Wallet button in the Jamf Trust app allows the user to, and the administration, to make sure that that credential is only put on the devices managed by Jamf, both phone and the watch that would be tethered to that phone. And so this is a pretty quick overview of what we do. As I mentioned, we're really excited to work with Jamf. This is to create a best-in-class integrated end-user app and the workflows that organizations need to solve this puzzle. Together with Jamf, we can offer an off-the-shelf solution that works with all the existing security infrastructure and other IT investments that you've made to deliver this experience in Wallet for your employees and manage hybrid work, flex work, or just a modern user experience for your employees in these offices.
Cool, thanks, Matt. So just like Matt was talking about, that sort of brings us back to the employee experience, which is now where I want to go with regards to our own internal Jamfs. Like Mike mentioned earlier, we had a blog post that talked all about how Jamf has been thinking about the modern employee experience in a hybrid work environment, a number of the things that we've done to try to address the needs that employees have working across a multitude of different environments. This includes making sure they have access to the services and apps they need, making sure they have credentials to get into the buildings that they want to get into, and so on and so forth. So I would encourage you to go check out this blog post. It's pretty cool. It's more than just about the Apple Wallet badge solution. It's a lot about how Jamf is thinking about hybrid work. But one of the things that we did that was really fun is we worked on making a sort of like excitement video for our teams to help them understand what the experience would look like. Because there's a lot of people who've maybe never used Apple Wallet before. There's a lot of people who aren't sure how you're supposed to use it. You know, it's sometimes when you use a new system, the question mark is just around how does this thing work? And you know, maybe I'm a little nervous about adopting this new solution. So we made a fun little video. I'm going to play it for you here before we continue on with the presentation. So enjoy.
Stacy! Stacy! Come on, I see you in the window. Meet me at the door. Benny! Forgot my employee badge. You know how it is.
It's on your iPhone now, Roger. Right in Apple Wallet. Claire.
You all right?
Who, me? I'm fine. I forgot my employee badge. Again, you think something you need every day would be easy to remember, but here we are.
Don't worry. Now you can put your badge on your iPhone.
You what?
Yep, and it's incredibly easy. Log in with single sign-on, add your employee badge to Apple Wallets, and you're done. There is no step. Hey, no stress. Only one thing to remember now.
So that was a good icebreaker for the beginning of the project. We started rolling out this initiative earlier this late spring. And it just helped, you know, our teams to understand how you use this thing, where they could find it, and get to understand how easy it would be to see the experience. But one of the things that I'm really excited about is that with the partnership between Jamf and Swift Connect, there's sort of this whole new world that potentially opens up. And I know this audience in particular, being the fact that you're here at JNUC, thinks a lot about the device as well. And one of the things that I think is really neat to kind of explore, and this is something that we've thought about a little bit, is how could you take the information that you can get from somebody using their phone to badge into an office and then take other actions based on that information for your mobile device configurations. And so we started thinking about context, and context is something that we've talked about in the past at JNUC and a lot of other customer case studies, things like that. Setup and reset are examples of context applications that we've built in order to allow you to change a device's configuration or workflow based on its environment or what it's doing. But there's some really, really neat sort of Pandora's box ideas that bringing these two worlds together could potentially empower. And I think that these examples that I'm going to share with you are just a couple of examples of some of the things that we've thought about and would love to get your feedback on in areas where you think this physical world and these physical devices and access to digital services could really take on a whole new meaning. So one of the examples that I want to talk through, and this is all theoretical, would be maybe the idea that a person who's going to work and is going to badge into a location that is at their work. In this instance, let's say it's a pilot who is going into the crew lounge at an airport, which means that that pilot is checking in for duty. And they carry an electronic flight bag, and that electronic flight bag has got apps on it that they are allowed to use when they are like in a hotel in a city that they've never been to before, and they have 12 hours there or 24 hours there. And maybe it has apps on it like Netflix or things like that so that they can use that device to kind of ease the burden of having to be in a city that they've never been in before. So they're encouraged to use it as a personal device. But obviously when they're flying an airplane, the worst thing that they could do is have Netflix on their device and watch Netflix in the cockpit. So what if there was a situation where when this pilot goes to the airport and they badge into the airport crew lounge, that badge information from Swift Connect tells Jamf Pro that they're at work and their device changes and those apps are hidden and notifications are suppressed. And then when they're done with their shift and they badge back out of that crew lounge to head home, the device is restored to the state that it was in because we know that they badged into the crew lounge and then they badged out to go home. So that's one really, really cool example. On the top here, you'll see events, and on the bottom, you'll see Jamf Pro doing its thing. Another thing that we thought about is, what if you are, Mike's use case here, you're visiting San Diego for JNUC and you have a local office, but you're based out of Minneapolis. And so your devices and your services are all kind of based around home base being in Minneapolis. But when you go into the office, and I think this is the thing people still need, you need access to the right printer because you've got to print something. It's probably not your boarding pass, but it's something. So you badge into this office in San Diego, and because you badged into the San Diego office, Jamf Pro installs the right driver on your Mac because it knows it's associated with you as a user, and all of a sudden, because you have badged into the San Diego office, there's a task that was just done on its own. You didn't have to go out and find that driver. You didn't have to wonder where to get it. Didn't have to go to self-service, whatever it might be. And then finally, last use case would be, let's say you have a corporate issued device and you work in the high-tech industry, or you are in a particularly sensitive field where there's research and development or classified documents, and you are taking your iPhone into a development lab or a records room or something like that. And when you badge into that room, they want to make sure that you can't take pictures of documents and take them out with you. So you badge into the restricted access room or the highly secure room, and as soon as you badge in and you see that that user has entered the room, what you will see is that all of the applications that use the camera on this corporate issued device are hidden and they go away. So there's no chance that you would be able to walk away with that data. And of course, when you leave that highly secure room, if you badge back out, that service is restored. So these are just a couple of examples of the things that we think are really exciting about being able to take this world of what used to be a plastic card tapping on a badge and instead tying it to a user, being able to think about that user's mobile devices and where they are and what they might need based on where they are. Maybe you could pop up the lunch menu if you wanted to through a web clip or something like that. But we think it opens a whole new exciting world of opportunity, and we are really, really eager to dig in the coming months, into early next year to find out what more is possible. There's one thing I want to make sure that you know about is that in the expo hall down on the main floor, you can stop by the Swift Connect booth and actually download a demo application that we've made here for JNUC. It's actually our internal application that we just skinned for JNUC, so it looks really cool. And you can issue a credential on your own phone going through the exact same process that our employees go through, so you can kind of see how easy it is. And then that little badge will be able to tap into some HID readers that we have down on the Swift Connect table. So definitely make sure you go and check out that experience. You'll see how simple and easy it is. And before we wrap, I want to leave some time for question and answer. So I'm going to invite Adam back up here to source some questions. So if you've got questions, raise your hand. Adam will run around to you, and the three of us will help answer questions.
Matt will answer questions. The dog.
Hey, all right. So, hey. All right. My major question goes around. So, Swift Connect is a third party there. Most of our environment doesn't just have Apple. So, the question is really for Swift Connect is Android devices. Can this work with Android devices as well? Because some employees don't have the iOS device.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, it does. The experience is nearly identical to what Mike was describing. So you would provision a credential, it goes into the phone, it's in an app, not in the wallet, but the experience of being able to manage it, having that credential, being able to tap against a reader when the phone is locked and get you into those places is exactly the same.
It's an interesting question. Even at Jamf, we don't have 100% of our employees using iPhone. A large majority of our employees do. But that was definitely a question that came up when we rolled out the service, and obviously can be easily addressed. We can have a similar experience as well. Next question.
Quick follow-up on it then. On the Jamf side, then managing that Android portion, is there a possibility of doing that as well?
Gotcha. So the question was, does an Android device need to be managed? It does not. It's an app. So it's just an app that's deployed to the device that can provision the credential. So there's not a device management component to it. Next question.
Hello. So all of this connectivity seems really magical, 25th century Star Trek awesomeness. The paranoid part of my mind is thinking that this is an entirely new set of threat vectors and personal identifying information that's out there. And I guess also that, a lot of these security systems have proprietary information behind them that allow them to work. So I guess I'm wondering how you're thinking about that in terms of creating all this connected stuff.
I'll take a crack at it and you take a crack at the part. Yeah, so the question is, with new systems that are introduced into your cloud infrastructure, there's potential new security threat vectors, and there's personally identifiable information there. The good news is that I think actually a lot of these systems already exist today, and many of them are actually even cloud-oriented. So this data is there. This data is somewhere. These credentials have people's names and things like that associated with them. So it's not necessarily new systems that exist. We are certainly connecting different systems, which does, of course, increase, I think, the security posture that you have to think through in the way you want to. But the same is true for kind of any other identity-connected cloud system. So I think it's a very similar proposition as that, but you guys do it all the time, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so the first point I would say is all we do is fill out cybersecurity questionnaires. And we're SOC 2, Type 2 compliant, we're GDPR compliant, and all that. This data already exists in some combination or in copy in your directory system and in your access control system. The access control systems today are a lot of times outside the purview or outside the management of IT. They're in the security department, which is sometimes in the real estate department, and so they're not subject to a lot of the same standards sometimes. By connecting these, you can help unify that, and you can actually, some clients have chosen to take the PII out of the access control system and just have a hash of those names and along with the credential numbers and the permissions, with the doors and the access rights for that. So I don't think this is introducing any new data to any systems that didn't have it today. It's more of a rationalization of what was already there.
We're going through a whole contractor workflow. So contractors that are hired for a fixed amount of time, we're actually going through a process now of how do we offboard them. So will there be a workflow that it could say tie into something like Sapling or another HR system that it cuts off their access to a building either at a certain time of day or after a certain date?
Yes, so if you have an expiration date for that person or for that profile type in your HR system and we're connected to that, then we can automatically turn that person off in the access system. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned is the credential management through Apple. So we can actually make a call to HID or to Apple to remove the credential from that device or suspend it from that device, in addition to removing the permissions or suspending the permissions in the access control system or systems. So yeah, all of that, the expiration we can do.
Does this work for all modern readers? And if not, what should I be telling our purchasing and facilities team to look for to make sure it works with the readers?
So there's a guy in the row behind you, 4 people to your right, that could tell you about the readers. But most HID, if I'm echoing this properly, most HID readers from the last 10 years, sort of since 2013, should be compatible. You may need to upgrade the firmware or add a small module to the back of it, but our goal is to preserve your existing investment in your existing security infrastructure and just be additive.
If we like to get started with that solution, what's the software component that we are missing? Like, do we need a new Jamf product or a Swift Connect product that we need to integrate?
Well, we don't have a specific announcement to make about a specific Jamf product, but the idea is that there is an application that your end users will use that they will request the credential from. So once they authenticate, it's integrated to a platform like Swift Connect does. You would need a system that links your credential manager to your access control system, and it's sort of that connector, right? It's a cloud service. And then between those two things, you probably already have the other two components, the badge readers and the credential issuer and the access control system. And then that's how it all comes together. The app for the employees, the connection, cloud service. Does that make sense? So ideally, what we talked about is Jamf Trust. That's the app that will support this functionality. Any other questions? Okay, well, we'll hang here for a couple of minutes. If you do have other questions that you want to ask up here, feel free, but thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.